When talking with a client about renovations that they want to do to their property to help them figure out how they're going to get the most value back, it's important to understand how to actually isolate and determine what that value is. It's also important to understand how to have the conversation with them about which renovations they should do so that they can maximize the value for the cost and time that they put into it. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. Hey, what's up? It's Jeff with Property Brain, and in this video, we're going to talk about how to determine what value your clients could potentially get from renovations they complete and how to maximize that potential value by focusing on certain types of renovations. Now, in a previous video, we talked about the fact that cost may not necessarily equal value. And if you haven't watched that video, I'd encourage you to go watch that first. But basically, the gist of it is the fact that the cost associated with it does not necessarily impact what the market is going to see. Potentially, the renovations that were done could have been over improvements, so they could have been unneeded, or they could have just been done at different prices by different people. And so, as a real estate agent, you want to be able to dive into the market, to the data, and look at the comparables and see what value are those renovations or updates that were done to a property actually worth. That way you can help give guidance to your client to help them figure out whether or not it's worth their time and energy and their money to do certain renovations. So the first point I want to talk about is that the comps drive the value. And what that means is if you're doing renovations, if your clients are doing renovations that are not supported by the comparables, they're not going to be able to get a lot of value out of it. In fact, they might not be able to get any value. As we stated with the fact that costs may not equal value, when you're doing renovations that are over improvements or are unneeded, there's a potential that the market just flat out shows no value or very minimal value for renovation. But most renovations, especially if you're focusing on the right type, which we'll talk about a little bit later, do show value in the market. But the key is to figure out how much value do they actually show. Now, to figure out the value of potential renovations, there's a couple things that you want to do. First, you want to look for comparables that have similar renovations. So if you have a client that's looking at renovating their kitchen and bathrooms, you're going to want to make sure that the comparables that you find also have renovated kitchens and bathrooms. Now, to truly isolate the value of those renovations, you're going to want to find some comps that feature those renovations and some comps that don't. And by doing so, that's going to allow you to estimate the difference between those comparables and isolate that value. If you're just looking to find the value of a property once it has those renovations, you wouldn't necessarily need the set of comps that doesn't have them. You would want to focus more on the comps that do have them. The second thing you want to do is you want to make adjustments for any differences for other categories. So for example, if you've picked comps that have similar renovations, as well as some that don't have the similar renovations, but they're slightly different in square footage, or maybe they have different garage count, or they're sold slightly longer ago, maybe a couple of the comps sold 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, and you need to bring them up to the current value, you would want to make adjustments for these things, for square footage, for garage, for time of sale, to make sure that you're getting all your comparables on an even playing field before you try to isolate that value for the renovations. Once you've done that, you're going to want to take a look at the comparables and see what value they show for that type of renovation. So for example, if you have a property that's 2,000 square feet, it's 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, and it's going to be renovated, and you're trying to isolate the value for that renovation, you would want to search for your comparables. And if you found 3 comps, for example, that were all similar in square footage and all similar in bedroom and bathroom count, you could look at their prices and be able to determine what value that renovation shows. So for example, if we look at comparables number 1 and number 3, you can see that they're very similar. They're both close to 2,000 square feet, just like our subject. They're both 4 bedroom, 3 bathroom, and they're both renovated. The only difference between these is that comparable number 3 has a 1-car garage. So this is where I was saying you would want to make adjustments for those differences first. So by looking at that, we could see that comparable number 1 with a 2-car garage sold for $500,000 and comparable number 3 with a 1-car garage sold for $490,000, which tells us that the value of a garage is $10,000. So in that case, if you made that adjustment to comparable number 3, you'd have comparable number 1 and 3, both at $500,000. And then if we look at comparable number 2 and we see that it is also similar in square footage and bedroom and bathroom count, and it also has a 2-car garage, but it's unrenovated and it's sold for a price of $450,000, we would easily be able to estimate in this case that the renovations were worth approximately $50,000. Now, it's not that straightforward all the time, right? You might have more variables in the comparables that you have to adjust for. You might not have to just adjust for garage. You might have to address things like square footage or time of sale and a multitude of other things first. At other times, you might be able to find a number of comps that are very similar, that sold at a similar time, that you don't need to do a lot of adjustments with. And the beauty of this is that you don't necessarily even have to make them current value. You could look back 3 or 4 months and find a set of comps that were all sold at that time that were similar, some with renovations, some without, and be able to isolate the value at that time, and maybe potentially use that as a percentage of the total sale price. So for example, if you looked back and found comps that sold 6 months ago, and they sold at an average of $500,000, and the renovated ones proved $50,000 at that time, you could assume that the renovations were worth approximately 10%. Now you could bring that forward to current day, and if the homes are selling at $550,000, for example, and you're looking at that, you could potentially assume the fact that maybe the renovations in this case would be worth $55,000. So being able to take the comparables, make adjustments, and actually break down and isolate the value from the renovations is extremely important. Now, sometimes it's going to be easier to do this than other times. If you're looking at full renovations, it becomes pretty easy because you're going to be able to find some comps that were fully renovated and some that weren't. If we're looking at things like individual amenities like a deck or a type of maybe a wet bar or something like that, it becomes a bit more difficult. And so you might have to do a little bit more in depth of a search and actually look through more properties to be able to really isolate that. And in that case, you're also likely going to have to make more adjustments to the properties for other things like square footage and time of sale and all that, because you're going to need a broader set of data. So anytime you're doing this, just remember, try to search for comps that feature the same amenity, the same renovation, as well as potentially some that don't. That way you can determine what that value is, set them up side by side and make some adjustments, and then be able to isolate that value and use it to apply to your scenario. All right, so the second thing we want to talk about in this video is the fact that some renovations are worth more than others or are more valuable in the long run. And so being able to help guide your clients in a way to focus on the correct renovations will get them the most bang for their buck. So let's talk about how you determine which renovations you should recommend to your clients when they're looking to make some changes to their property. We've already touched on this a little bit, but the first thing you want to do is make sure that they're focusing on doing renovations that are found in the market. If you are making renovations that aren't found in the market comparables, you're likely over improving the property, or you're just doing things that people don't necessarily want, even if they're not necessarily an over improvement. This could be something like putting in bright red quartz countertops if it's in a market that would not support that. While it might not be an over improvement, it still might not be needed or wanted in the marketplace, and therefore the potential value from it might not be there. In fact, it could even be a negative value if somebody looked at the fact that they would have to now come in and remove the renovation that was just done just to kind of get back to where the market is at. Second, you want to focus on the major items. Now, this is something you're probably already telling clients, but focusing on things like the kitchen, the bathrooms, or other major components of the property will get them the most bang for their buck. When they're sitting there and they complete a kitchen renovation, or they do a renovation to the exterior, they do stucco and a new roof and new windows or something, and the buyers that are coming in and looking are now looking at that property and saying, great, I don't have to do this big item. It makes it more likely that people are willing to pay more value for that because of the fact that now they don't have to worry about that. They can focus on smaller stuff that maybe they can do themselves. So by focusing on the big items, the kitchens, the bathrooms, the mechanicals like furnace and water heater, generally speaking, will be the most impactful in value, but they'll also help the most with marketability. And the third thing is that the more complete the renovations, the more likely that they add value. So if you go in and you only renovate the kitchen, but you leave the rest of the house untouched in its original 1960s, the potential buyer that's coming in might love the renovated kitchen, but they're still going to look at the rest of the house and think, I have a lot of projects here, especially now you've highlighted the fact that you've got this beautiful new kitchen and this outdated home. And so for them to come in and want to bring the entire home up to that kitchen, they're going to be seeing dollar signs. And so even though that shouldn't necessarily affect the value of the kitchen, in some ways it does maybe hurt where they say, I don't want to pay this much more for this house because of the fact that I have so much more to do. By focusing on doing a more complete renovation, even if it's slightly less thorough, by focusing on doing renovations to the whole interior, for example, or the whole exterior, rather than just picking individual projects, will be more likely to maximize the value. Obviously, that's easier to say than done, right? Your clients might not have an unlimited budget or the ability to go renovate the entire property. But if they're looking at doing significant renovations and they're saying, I can spend a lot of money on the kitchen or I can spend a medium amount of money on the entire house, it's more likely by addressing the entire house, it's going to, one, be a little bit more marketable because of the fact that people will walk in and will feel that they don't necessarily have to do any renovations to get certain portions of the house in line with others. And it will also generally help a bit more in an appraisal. Because the fact of the matter is, an appraiser, when they walk through and they're looking at the condition of a property, they're going to kind of be lumping it into some different buckets. And so if they go in and they see a beautifully renovated kitchen, but a completely renovated rest of the home, it's more likely that they will have to hold that one's condition down a little bit more than if they walk in and the entire home has been updated, even if it's not as thorough of an update. So again, just really important to make sure that when you're doing renovations or when you're suggesting renovations, that you have that conversation with your clients to help them understand that focusing all their time and money and energy in one location of the house might not get them the most return for the cost and effort that they put into it. But anyway, I hope that this video has helped you get a little bit better idea of how you can address these renovations. And when somebody comes to you and they want to know what the value is of a certain renovation or complete updates or whatever to their property, hopefully you can use some of these things to either be able to isolate those values for them or to be able to have conversations with them to help guide them in the right direction so that they're not sitting back looking at their checkbook and saying, man, I spent a ton of money on all this stuff and the contractors told me it was going to pay off in value, and they're sitting there looking at the fact that it won't. So hopefully these can help you out with that. If you have any questions, let us know. We'd love to help you out. Otherwise, thanks for watching this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found some of this information helpful. If you did, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button. And while you're at it, go ahead and follow us on some of your favorite social media channels to make sure that you can connect with us, where we can answer questions and just get to know you a little bit. Thanks again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.